Welcome everyone to this Peak-Ryzex presentation on trends in supply chain and warehouse automation. Today we've asked one of our vendors, Ivanti Supply Chain, formerly Wavelink, to spend some time with us and discuss the trends impacting your supply chain operations right now. I'm going to lay out the most critical trends that you, our customers, are telling us are impacting your operations right now, and then ask for a partner, Ivanti, to help show us some of the best practices around how to address these. Our presenters today will be myself, Tom Heitman, Manager Solutions Consulting for Peak-Ryzex, Don Osborne, and Chris Achille from Ivanti Supply Chain. Don is the partner manager for Ivanti, and Chris is their solutions engineer. Our plan today is to spend a few minutes discussing current critical supply chain operation trends, and then Chris from Ivanti will showcase a few of these solutions Ivanti has to address these issues. Don, are you out there?
Yes, I am, sir, and thank you very much for inviting us to join you today.
Well, glad to have you. And would you take us through trend number one?
Sure. Tom and I were having a discussion as we were laying these out, and the first one I think that came to mind was this younger workforce, the millennial workforce. Every generation has to be named with a label nowadays. So really, one of the big trends we're all seeing in the workplace today that customers are having to deal with is I don't know if you saw my picture at the intro, but old gray bearded guys like me are not running in the warehouse anymore. It's younger folks. Would you agree, Tom?
I would agree, yes.
They're tech savvy. They're used to using Android basically operating systems. They're used to touch and smartphones and things like that. And this is really a big disruptor in supply chain and operations today. So Tom, if you would, what are some of the implications of this younger workforce?
Yeah, you bet. Younger workforce, everybody has a smartphone. They're used to HTML interfaces, buttons on screen, keyboards on screen, gestures, right? So, green screen, aka Telnet, sessions and devices with keys are old school. The younger and seasonal workforce are used to the gesture and swipe interface with their consumer phones. Old school interfaces get lost on them. Having the ability to transition older Telnet screens to newer devices with virtualized keyboards and modernized the text-based interfaces and the more GUI-style interfaces will streamline the time it takes to train them on the systems they have to interact with, and also streamline their activity.
Yeah, I couldn't have said that better. I mean, the impact to the customers, to all the Fortune 100 all the way down to every SMB out there is, as the workforce gets younger, they come in, as you said, with different skill sets, different abilities, different talents from their generation, and a lot of the technology like Telnet, et cetera, that's been around since the beginning of auto ID is difficult to them. So, from a customer's perspective, this impacts training costs, it impacts productivity, and it impacts error rates. All those things you mentioned. It has drastic impacts on users' operations.
So, how about if we flip it over to Chris for a minute and have him show us some examples of these new user interfaces that are designed for younger millennial type workforce?
Thanks, Don. So to get started, we'll go ahead and log into Avalanche, and we're going to look for our device. And for the demo, I'm going to be using a TC8000. But I think what I might do um, is have two devices side by side, so that way when I'm flipping back and forth, you can see the difference between the two. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the TC8000. We'll remote control into that one first. And then we're going to go into our inventory, and I'll grab the CT50 by Honeywell, and let's launch that one. And we'll get them side by side so we can get a good comparison. And then from here we can launch velocity within remote control, or if the user is on the device, you can monitor what the user is doing at the time as well. So we'll launch our modernized demo, both of these. And this is the modern look, or the modernization of the green screen. So if I flip over here to the green screen, now you can see that we're taking the information and we're presenting it to that modern look, or to a touch screen look on there. So if we see we've got our warehouse and our storefront, all the stuff that the user needs to interact with is right there in front of them. We have our exit button down at the bottom. And from here on the green screen, in the past it may have been 1 and enter, and you had to look for the 1 or look for the particular keys. Here on the modernized demo, all we have to do is just click on that and it does everything for us. It takes us to the next screen with that touch button.
So let me interrupt you and stop you right there for a second, Chris. So for the customers watching out there, this side by side, this is a good example of what we're talking about. On the left is the traditional green screen or telnet interface. It's been running on non-Android devices for years, typically older devices with keypads, pistol grips, all the way back to Pocket PC days and other things. That green screen has been around for a number of years, but that's the challenge with the younger workforce, is handing a device that's running that to them is difficult. There's a training issue there, a learning curve. Whereas, as you can see by a new user interface on the right, what we would call a modernized interface, same application, exact same warehouse management application, but now a younger worker familiar with pinch and zoom and touchscreen, etc., is going to find that interface very easy to use, much more comfortable to them, as well as lowering training times, error rates, etc. So please continue.
So on our TC8000, we'll go back to our modern demo. We'll click on warehouse. We'll go into outbound, pick a tote, and here it wants us to do a task, so we'll select a task and then confirm a location. And there we are, and that's the touch screen, or the rapid modernization. We still have all of our buttons that we need down at the bottom, so if we flip over to our green screen, we've got our shortcuts and our back button, and all the information that the user is going to need to see. So if I do this on the Honeywell device, and it's looking for a task, we'll do the same one. We'll confirm that location, and we should be taken to the same place. And all the same information is there that we've presented from the green screen is now in that touch screen.
Thank you, Chris. Don, trend number 2 regarding OS migration is a big subject. Would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, absolutely. You didn't call me here for my good looks, I know. So the next big trend is, along with the younger workforce, of course, is new operating systems, or OS migration, operating system migration in the auto ID barcode scanning workplace. What you're seeing on the left is the Windows device, and what you're seeing on the right is the Android device. Android is becoming the de facto operating system on barcode scanners, and this is, it's causing a disruption. Customers today are across the industry, across the world, are moving from non-Android supply chain devices, especially mobile devices, and they could be barcode scanners. We're seeing new devices too, like tablets and other devices, come into the warehouse, into the supply chain, but they're not Windows based. Android is really driving the change, and these changes have been going on for years, but it's very disruptive to a customer's operations to have to do that. And I know, Tom, that you, especially in Peak, have had a lot of experience with this type of migration. Tell us what your experience is with this over the years.
Oh, you bet. So, as you can see from the slide, the industry has gone through a number of operating system changes over the years. From the beginnings of DOS, through a little time period of Palm OS, through the original Pocket PC and Windows CE 3s, into your CE 5s and above and Windows Mobile. And now the industry is trending towards the market share of Android to the newest devices in the space. And most of these devices, as you heard earlier, are devoid of physical keys. So it becomes more of a consumer touchscreen experience with interaction on the device, but has the capabilities of a more robust interchange. Don, why don't you show us, our customers, some of your best practices that Ivanti has developed to support the Android migration?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and like you said, we know we've been working with you with Peak-Ryzex for years, back when you were Peak and Ryzex, and you've worked with customers a lot over the years to make these migrations, and it's really not something to fear. It's just it's a process like anything else. So when moving to Android, what we've developed, and look at us as the technology solutions experts per se. We provide the technology that you take out to your customers and integrate and make work. But what we've seen, and this is from customer feedback as well as 20 years or more worth of expertise from our solutions architects, breaking this migration down, this Android migration, breaking it down into 2 steps really makes it easier for customers to consume these new operating systems. We call it rapid migration and modernization. You might also hear us call it RM squared. What RM squared is it's a 2-step process. One, you migrate to Android, and that's what this is demonstrating here. You start from a non-Android device, and you get that supply chain enterprise application running on the Android device. Just get it running in green screen mode, get the keyboard you need running. There may be other functionality you want to put in here, but the basic idea is to migrate first, get the Android device, whether it's a tablet, whether it's a new device from one of the standard device manufacturers, get it running in the customer's environment. And then after you get through the migration, now that you've got the Android device running and your users are still basically seeing the same screen flow they were seeing originally, now you can move on to the next step, which we call modernization. And modernization is taking it from what you see on the left, which is a green screen environment, and really taking full advantage of that new touchscreen Android-based environment where you've got pinch and zoom, and you've got, instead of having menu items where you hit 1, enter, 2, enter, you actually have buttons on the screen, and it's more of a full-fledged user experience. This ties back to what we said earlier, which this is the type of environment that younger, more tech-savvy generation is used to working. They already know how to do this. And so for your customers, this is where, like a specific example of where a training cost drops. Because once you make the modernization step, now you can bring a younger worker in and you don't really have to go through all the training of, on this screen, you go to menu item 4. On this screen, you go to menu. You don't do that. The worker just looks down and says, I got to hit this button, I hit that button. And it makes productivity faster. It makes training times much lower. It does lower error rates and things like that too. Any other comments, Tom, before we show an example of this?
No, I think you summed it up very well.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, so before I flip it over to Chris to show you some actual examples of some screens running on some devices, let me briefly show you some of the tools that Ivanti Supply Chain have put together to support this rapid migration and rapid modernization. And of course, Peak as an integrator, you can do this. Your customers can do this. But the point is, we set up this website called rapid.ivanti.com. If you go there, you'll find the
RM squared, or the rapid migration and modernization screen. And what it is it's an online tool builder that helps you build your configuration for your Android devices. It's a pretty simple tool. You come out here, if you click on the Get Started link, for example, on migration, remember, we always recommend migrating before modernizing. It's going to take you into the migration tool. Again, migration is taking your non-Android device, just getting that configuration running on your Android device as rapidly as possible. There's actually some videos out here that show you how to use it, but when you click on the Get Started button, it's going to take you through a configuration utility. You basically go through, fill out the information on the screens for your device type, etc., what the make and model is, the OS version, etc. Now, the tool also allows you, if you're currently using other Ivanti supply chain emulation clients on non-Android devices, you can export those configurations out of the non-Android device and then import them into the Rapid Migration Builder. I'm not going to do that here, but if you do that, it just speeds up the process. It alleviates the next few screens you go through. And they're just basically telling the emulation client, the Android TE, for example, what host you're going to connect to, give it a name, what emulation type you want, whether you're using an IBM type or a VT220, etc. Whatever emulation you're using to connect to your WMS or your enterprise supply chain application. There's a few more screens you go through here. You select how you'd like your default layout to look and font size and things like that. Once you go through the full builder, what it does at this point is then it emails you your configuration file. So basically, you come out here to the Rapid Migration tool builder, go through a few screens there, or you export and import your existing configuration, and at the end of that process, it will email you your new Android configuration. You drop that on your Android device, and boom, you're up and running with an Android device in your environment. Now, again, this is migration only, so it's still going to look, probably green screen. There's no modernization going on here. It's just converting that over to run on the Android device. The second step, of course, would be modernization. Very similar process. You would click Get Started here on the modernization link. What it would do is take you to here. And again, the purpose of modernization, now you're going to take it beyond just this green screen, and you're going to have the adaptive engine start using the rules in order to reconfigure those green screens into a touchscreen environment. The way that works is you go through basically the same screens you went through for a migration, but there's one extra step. In this case, you select what your back-end enterprise application is that you're connecting to. We've tested a number of these. That's what we've provided out here. What this does is this just sends the user a set of rules for the adaptive engine to be able to figure out those screens and be able to convert them, modernize them on the fly. Now, we have many different WMS systems out here. We also have other, if your specific system, or if you have a custom WMS or even a retail system, you can click other. There's a number of things that happen there that notifies us. We'll contact you. If you're a customer and you're not running one of these, I would strongly recommend, or even if you are running one of these, I would strongly recommend you work with Peak, because they can make sure you get the right rules base for your particular back-end system. And then again, the purpose is what those rules are doing is they're understanding how to read these screens and then adapt them over to this modernized function. But again, that's rapid migration and then rapid modernization. And now that you've seen how the tool works, I think I'll flip it over to Chris, and Chris can show you some examples of this actually running on barcode scanners. I think we're going to be using TC8000 devices.
Thanks, Don. So what we've got here is we've got the Windows device, and this is a 9090 CE5. This is a device that many of you may be used to. But what we can do is we can take the configuration or even the backup, if you have the backup file of this particular device. We can run through what Don had talked about as far as the rapid migration tool that you see behind us here. And you could import that backup file within this rapid migration. And then at the end of it, when you receive your email, you'll receive the WLDEP for the Android device. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up or just do a side-by-side comparison of the 9090 CE5 and the Android device. This is the same server that we're connected to. It's just the migration. We're going from green screen to green screen. There's nothing fancy going on here. But I guess one thing to really note that you can really see up front is the real estate on these newer devices or the Android devices. As far as well as the keyboards are much easier to get to on the Android device versus if you had to go and launch the keyboard on the 9090 device, there's quite a few steps to get to that. And then there's the keyboard for that versus just a tap or a click on the screen and that keyboard's displayed or it's shown. And that's the rapid migration. Don, I'm going to go ahead and flip it back over to you.
Okay, that's a migration. Now, Chris, why don't you show us some examples of a fully modernized environment?
The rapid modernization. It's the same URL that we used to do the migration. Just scroll down a little bit and you'll get to the rapid modernization and the forms to go through that. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take the TC8000 and I'm just going to go into the modernized demo once again. And then once this launches, it's going to be the screen that we saw in the past, and I'm just going to run through this again with the rapid modernization. And this is the point where we want to get to as far as that younger workforce that's coming on board, where they're more used to the Android touch screen and the keyboards to where you can swipe across those particular keyboards and get to the one that you need. You have that all right here at the touch of the screen. Also, once again, if we go back and flip this over, it's the same green screen that you're used to. We're just modernizing it for that younger workforce.
Thank you, Chris. Don, I think we want to move on to trend number 3, migration of Telnet to HTML. And what we're seeing in the industry is that while green screen or Telnet has been where most systems have been over the years, more and more host systems and interfaces are moving to a browser-based format, including systems like SAP. And part of the modernization that we touched on previously here is, in my opinion, a great way to step from Telnet to modernize that to get the older workforce acclimated to the newer interface as an interim, and then now moving from TE or Telnet into HTML as the front end interface. Would you like to pass along your comments on the subject?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, this is something that is really, speaking as Ivanti supply chain, it's kind of surprised us a little bit. Telnet as a technology has been around since 1954 or something like that. But then there's very good reasons, though, why customers use it and why it is the predominant interface. But along with the migration of operating systems, as technology is moving to a different operating system base, we're now seeing the enterprise application providers, those being like WMS providers or even just custom providers, they're starting to adopt a browser or HTML interface instead of Telnet. And there's a lot of reasons for it, but the point is, along with OS migrations now, we're finally starting to see enterprise applications migrating their applications to a browser or an HTML interface. The primary example of this is probably SAP, and that's what we're showing on the screen here, is some SAP interfaces. SAP, a number of years ago, moved their customer base from SAP console to the ITS mobile interface. And that interface is all HTML based. They were kind of one of the first ones to do it. Other enterprise application providers kind of dipped their toe in the water, but it took a while for it to take off, and now we're really starting to see it take off. So from your customer's perspective, what they're going to start seeing is now not just telnet client requirements, but they're starting to see more web interface requirements. Now, Ivanti, as you know, has been marketing both telnet and web interfaces for years. We also provide the Nartec brand, as well as our other industrial browsers. Customers may be using those industrial browsers on non-Android devices today. They may be using Nartec, they may be using one of the other industrial browsers, they may be using any of the other industrial browsers that are out there on the market. But if they're moving with this migration to Android, they're going to need a web client. Customers need a web or an HTML client now that is robust and everything else for that Android device. And from our perspective, from Ivanti Supply Chain's perspective, what we've built into our clients, again, having been doing these for 20 years or more, we've added capability to be able to do things like switch back and forth from sessions. The point being, to your point, Tom, this is another part of a migration process. If a customer is using Telnet as their interface today and they're going to move to HTML, you don't just flip a switch and that happens. You need technology that supports you and allows you to make that transition without impacting your warehouse. You don't want to shut your whole warehouse down just so you can deploy HTML as your interface. You need to make sure that your customers' operations are moving forward first, and then let the technology support it as you go along. I don't know, Tom, I think you've seen some examples of that too?
Oh, you bet. And one of the good features of working with your client that supports both Telnet and industrial browser is actually in one application. And you can actually minimize the deployment effort for devices already in the field because the application is the same. It's just a different license.
Good point. Very good point. And this is actually again back just on the Android world. The move to Android now, to go back in the old days, in the non-Android world, you had two separate clients, two separate binaries. Now in the Android world, it's just one binary. You're either using the Telnet side of it or the HTML side of it. I tell you what. So with that, Chris, why don't we flip over and you can show us an example of what a HTML client might look like on a device.
Velocity does have a web browser in it. And I'm going to go ahead and launch our web application here. This is all HTML based. So if you're running a backend server such as SAP or some other web interface, Velocity will be able to display those pages as well. It does require a separate license for web. So what we'll do is we'll run through a couple of these screens on here. Like I said, there's really nothing fancy about this web interface. It's just a kind of a drive-up store to show you that we do have the capabilities of running web on Velocity. We'll confirm our data. Oops, clicked a little too far on that one. I wasn't on the right spot of the button there. And that's it. I mean, it's like I said, there's nothing fancy about this web interface. I mean, it's got a button that we can click on. It shows us our transactions. But what we can do is if you are migrating from an emulation type 5250 or VT to a web interface, you could do that slowly if you wanted to. You could still have both systems up and running to get those users acclimated to the new web interface. We can launch or have an extra session just in case that that user may not be familiar with the screens or whatnot. So we can launch. We'll go into the modernized demo for this one, and then we'll launch the modernized demo. So here we've got our modernized demo, and now we can flip back and forth. So if you get lost within the application, you can give yourself kind of a reminder of where you're at by flipping back and forth between those applications. And once again, it's just the green screen on the other side of that modernized demo. So if you wanted to keep this in green screen while you're doing it, you can do that as well. And as far as, however far we get into that web URL, we can always fall back on our green screen if we need to. And once again, we have our keyboards at a touch the same as we did with TE. So if we needed to have that keyboard up, we have our keyboard as well.
Okay, thanks a lot, Chris. Yeah, and just as one other comment, speaking from the technology provider's perspective, one of the things we see, Tom, a lot, and what you're seeing on the screen right here, this is the current warehousing, supply chain operation, or even retail environment. It's a mix of devices from wearables to cellular phone looking devices to sleds that you drop a consumer device in to tablets. There's a plethora of different devices out there today. And speaking to your customers as the technology provider here, I can't stress enough the value in standardizing your users, your operations people's experience across each one of these devices. If every time they pick up a different form factor device, they have to see a different login screen or a different type of operation screen, all that does is slow things down. It increases errors. It increases training costs. So if you can standardize with one client across all those devices, so that, and from your customer's perspective, is so that their operations people, whatever device they pick up, they see the same user interface into the enterprise operation. That lowers training costs, that lowers their error rates, it increases productivity. All those beautiful things every warehouse manager wants. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out, speaking from a technology provider side, how important that is. So with that, we'll move on to the fourth trend, if you don't mind. The fourth trend that Tom and I spoke about was voice. It's all around voice enablement and voice adoption in supply chain operations. Voice picking started out a number of years ago as a nifty new technology. It's not nifty and new, well, still nifty, but it's not new anymore. Voice picking is pretty much standard throughout the industry. What we are seeing now, and the biggest trend we're seeing now, is customers are looking to take the advantages of voice-enabled operations into their complete supply chain operations. Into the retail environment, they want to use it throughout the supply chain, not just in picking. And so, as a technology provider, that's what we've been focusing on. So, and I know we've worked a lot with Peak. We've had a lot of successes over the last few years, especially. So, Tom, fill us in. What are your perspective on voice in the warehouse or in supply chain operations?
Sure. We at Peak-Ryzex have implemented a number of voice solutions, including Speakeasy from Ivanti. Both Telnet-based and HTML-based interfaces can be voice-enabled, providing users with the ability to get prompted from their system using voice and responding to the system using voice. This minimizes or removes the requirement to constantly look at the display during the course of their transactions. In many cases, folks using wearables can actually avoid having to wear the device on the wrist and instead wear it on a pouch on their hip, which makes a lot of the material handlers happy. It also allows users to continue to interact with the display if desired and only when required, and retain their existing screen flows. So we're not re-engineering the way that screens flow from one to the other. It's just allowing them to interact with it using voice. So the need for an expensive middleware, back-end integration, or special purpose devices is no longer required.
Yeah, and I gotta stop for our customers' perspective and thank Tom here in Peak-Ryzex for that. Was actually a nice little pitch for our specific voice solution, which is Speakeasy. But from your speaking for your customers' perspective and for customers in general, you know, voice technology, voice directed operations. You read about it in all the trade rags. There are a number of different ways and technologies to do it. Ivanti supply chain, of course, has the best, but from your customer's perspective, you're going to be as far as a trend, a disruptive trend in supply chain operations today. Yes, it's there. The question is, how do you take advantage of it? How do customers take advantage of it and get the most return for it? Obviously for the best investment dollar they can get. And I really have to thank Peak-Ryzex a lot for this, because you guys have done a lot from a consultative perspective, working with customers to help them understand not just the value of voice, but all the different solutions out there, including Speakeasy, et cetera, for how to do that. So, and with that, Chris has a little voice demo here to show an example of voice picking for anybody who may not have seen it before.
So I'm going to go ahead and launch the demo.
Welcome to the Wavelength Picking demo. Say warehouse or storefront.
So this is the same demo that we had used in the past. I just enabled voice and did a little bit of the configurations for voice on it. As you heard there, it was talking to me, letting me know kind of what screen I'm on. So from here, we can go ahead and talk to it. And I apologize up front. I am not using a headset during this. I'm just using the mic that's built in on the device. So there may be a little lag because of that. Warehouse.
Say an option.
Outbound.
Say an option.
Pick to tote.
Select your task.
And then from here, we could go ahead and pick our task. Now for the demo, I've got the tasks on the keyboard. So we'll go ahead and pick one.
Task number B74D. Go to location M5815F10.
And then we'll confirm it.
Item description: cooling fan. Quantity on hand 27.
And that would be the voice demo for velocity with that. And like I said, it really cuts down on those error rates that the users may encounter through that. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and flip it back over to you guys.
Thanks, Chris. And we come to our last major trend here now. And this is around enterprise mobility management, security requirements brought about by, again, Android OS migration. Device management, mobile device management, enterprise mobility management, whatever acronym you want to use, it's been around for a long, long time. The disruption, the trend is, as Android becomes more and more the de facto OS, security and how security is managed via device management is changing a lot. The ways if you think all the way back to years ago, we even had WEP. I don't know how many people still remember WEP out there today, but that's no longer the way we work today. With Android, with the new operating systems, security and device management, enterprise mobility management in general is changing. It's changing a lot. So I know for example, Peak-Ryzex, for a number of years has offered third-party managed services for device management for customers, for your customers, and for others in the market. And I know you have a lot of expertise on this, Tom. So can you tell us what customers will need to look for in mobile device management in the evolving Android world?
Well, yes. So with the trend from Windows to Android comes complexity. Implementing a powerful EMM product and providing services around staging and the management of these devices is a critical piece to the puzzle. There are currently two main Android branches, Android Plus and Android Enterprise, which seems to be the direction Google is steering the world. And I would expect to see that be the mainstream in about 2 years' time if they stay on track. The differences in the OS on these devices also requires knowledge on different configuration tools, utilities, settings, and procedures. We have found that most customers will retain a mix of both Windows and Android devices for the considerable future. Until those Windows devices are not repairable anymore, they're going to continue to use them and slowly replace that old stock with the new. Staging and management of these various devices and OS levels can be daunting as a result. So that's why we offer managed services to help stage and maintain these devices and to assist the customers in handling this effort. Along with that, we like to leverage these EML products to make that management and maintenance easier.
Yeah, that's great. And if I can just say one thing to the customers that are listening out there, you have multiple ways of implementing enterprise mobile management. There's multiple pieces to it. There's the technology, which from our perspective, from Ivanti's perspective, as a product, we call Avalanche. But you need help. You need expertise with the deployment, not just the deployment of the tool, but then the configuration of the tool and how you actually manage your environment. And that's really where I've seen, and I've worked with Peak again for years, I've seen Peak really provide that consultative expertise to customers to not just deploy a solution, but also understand how to configure it, how to use those tools in your environment, or work with Peak in their managed services environment to actually let them manage the devices for you. That's their professional services, and I highly, highly recommend customers take a look at it, especially in the new environment where security is not the way it's not your dad's security anymore. It's a dangerous world out there nowadays. So with that, I think, Chris, I'm going to flip over to you, and let's just show a quick example of Avalanche and certificates, etc.
With the collaboration of Ivanti and Peak-Ryzex, we can go ahead and get you set up with our MDM or Avalanche. And I'm going to go ahead and log into this. Now, Avalanche would be considered, like I said, your mobile device management. This is where you would go to be able to keep track of those devices. And you can see here, I've got a few devices listed in mine. And within Avalanche, we can also do the remote control. So in those past demos, I was actually doing the remote control of those devices straight from Avalanche. And I'll go ahead and just demonstrate that real quick for you. So we've got the 9090. This is that CE5 device. And this is the remote control for those Windows Mobile CE5 devices. And then we can go ahead and click on the view for that and bring up that device. Now I haven't left or shut down the TE session from that past device from when we demoed it earlier, but that's where we're at. That's the legacy or the Windows Mobile CE remote control. So we'll go ahead and shut this one down, and we'll go back into our mobile devices. And then we'll go into our TC8000, and we'll remote control into this device. And it's probably going to be right at the same screen where we left off in that voice demo. And there it is. So now we can, remote control these devices. We can get to them. If you needed to grab a file, let's say you're doing some troubleshooting on a particular application, you could get those files as well through that remote control session. So now we've got all our devices within Avalanche. So if you are doing a migration from Windows Mobile or CE over to Android, Avalanche can definitely help you get that task completed by housing all of those applications. So you could put in your Velocity application and push that out to those particular devices without having to cable each one of those. If your device is already in here, you could push out that software to them. And that's Avalanche. That's, Avalanche in a nutshell. And with that, I'm going to send it back over to you guys for the last time.
Well, that is all the time we have for our presentation today. I want to thank you all for coming and joining our presentation, and thank both Don and Chris for helping us along in this presentation. And if you have any questions as a follow-up after the presentation, feel free to reach out to me. Tom Heitman. My information is contained here, and look forward to hearing from everybody.